and welcome to the Jackals and Tackles Rugby Podcast. We're back. It's a new year, and rugby is taking off once again. This weekend, it was the return of the Investec Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup. There's plenty of talking points, plenty to make note of. And today, I am joined by Henry, as always. Henry, how are you? How's your new year? How's everything going?
I'm all good. Definitely much better now that the Champions Cup's back in full swing and Quins are doing well.
I was at it one game, and there's no more crisis.
URC is a weak league.
It's a good thing he's playing the Prem, isn't it? But anyway, we're here. We're going to talk about the Champions Cup. There was plenty of action and a few upsets. Surprisingly, I don't want to use the cliched old term that the FA Cup would have used when Macclesfield beat Crystal Palace, but God, there's a magic to the cup. Anyway, we'll start off with Quins, seeing as obviously you're a massive fan, seeing as they haven't won in about 5 years. Anyway, I'll let you just delve in with everything you've got about Quins. You can talk for half an hour. Go for it.
It is really weird. I know we've spoken a little bit sort of earlier, kind of missed the big issues with Quins sort of with our little break, but yeah, it's a weird time to be a Quins fan because on the one hand, doing absolutely awful in the Premiership, like eighth in the league, losing every week. I wish it was winning, losing every week, like getting not even just losing, getting hammered every week. And then it comes to the Champions Cup, and suddenly somehow we're putting 50 points on every team that comes to the stoop. Like, what is going on there? Obviously, I know the CEO Laurie Dalrymple's been on the Times this podcast, basically saying like these are where all the problems have come from. This is kind of what we're doing. Sort of not giving too much away, but saying it's a work in progress. But it kind of does show that Quins are now going hell for leather in the Champions Cup, and sort of at this point you kind of have to go: is a cup run on? Is it going to be a bit like Northampton? Maybe that's quite optimistic, but Northampton put Blueprint out last year. I don't see a reason if Quins can get their ducks in a row, like maybe they could go quite deep if they can do what they did against the Stormers. I know it was a weak Stormers team, but there's possibility.
You're dreaming.
I'm getting a bit carried away, but I'm letting myself. It's been a rough few weeks.
Look, I'll be honest, Henry. I think Ulster have more chance of winning the Champions Cup. Obviously they're not in it, but I do believe they have a better chance. It's not because it's kind of because whenever your director of rugby head coach comes out after the Sale defeat and has said the league is over, like as a fan, how do you feel?
It's such a weird position that Jason Gilmore's in. I've seen all these calls going, "Oh, get Gilmore out!" Like he's lost it. Like, but he's not the director of rugby. He's not a head coach. He came in last season as a defensive coach, which isn't. There's a whole argument about like the Quins' identity. Should they really stick with it, or is it time to kind of get what wins games rather than necessarily what's exciting? But he sort of came in last minute, and to his credit, kind of fronted up and said, "You know what? I'll take it." As I was alluding to with Laurie Dalrymple, he was saying that basically there was a sort of discussion and a vote within the team saying, do we hire someone in sort of last minute, or do we stick to what we've got and sort of see what happens? Rightly or wrongly, they chose to stick. It's not worked out in the Premiership, so we'll see what happens in Europe, but it's a very difficult position for him to be in the last minute. There's a lot of questions as whether Quinn should have made it more difficult. Obviously, you can look back to a few years ago with Leicester, when they lost Steve Borthwick and half their coaching staff, and that was a whole big fuss. They got quite a big payout from what was being said at the time. Maybe Quins should have been in line for something like that from Wales, but it's a weird one where he's not the man. Like, it's not his job to be doing. He's just filling in those boots. So yeah, it's such a weird one because you just kind of have to wait and see, and it's just tough.
The interesting thing that kind of jumped out to me there was about sticking with the Harlequins' way of playing attacking, entertaining rugby. But like you see teams across Europe doing it in terms of Bordeaux, Northampton, and Bristol. Like maybe you don't have the same resources and finances as them, but why can't you do what they're doing? Do you know what I mean? Like if you get all your ducks in order and get a team that's able to play that kind of rugby, give it 2 years or so, why can't you do that? Why can't you keep your identity and also play attacking rugby and win trophies?
Well, exactly. I maybe because I'm getting further detached from it, I sort of do believe it a little bit more. And maybe it's wishful thinking because we never saw it, but I think Danny Wilson kind of was trying to do that before. Like, he was really championing these young players coming through, particularly Lucas Friday, who had an absolutely stellar game at the weekend, starting first start at scrum half, filling in those boots from Danny Kerr. And I mean, Will Porter's no slouch either, but Lucas Friday looks like the next big thing. You know, he could be a 100 capper for England potentially. It's a lot to say before his first cap, but he is of that quality by all accounts. And then, you know, in the centres, we've got quite a few number 12s coming through. There's Brendan Bradley, there's uh, Hayden Hyde, you know, there's quite a few. There was even Lennox Anyamwood before he departed from Montpellier that really were looking like that punchy number 12 that, you know, filling in like an Andreas Hazen was. But we don't have that right now, and that's kind of a big issue. And yeah, I think there probably was that development, and then, you know, you lose your head coach and that entire path just crumbles. And I think it's probably a case of sort of working out who's going to come in, sort of what style, what version of that style you're going to play, because you could bring in, obviously Richard Cockerell's out of a job at the moment, he's potentially in the conversation, but that wouldn't be his natural style. That would be very much more abrasive, which maybe could build from that and sort of create that fast flowing attacking way. But I think it's just sort of having that punch up front. I think Quins have really lacked sort of those players that can kind of drag the game from the scruff of the neck, which they've had historically. Marcus Smith can do that. Alex Donbrent can when the game's going his way, but I don't see that in the squad right now. But I think, you know, give it a couple of years, and they could be if they've got the right direction and guidance.
Hmm. No, look, and look, as you say, he's performed phenomenally, and he's have won both games at home in the Champions Cup so far, which, look, is managed to get you through, I believe, to the next round of the Champions Cup anyway, because points differentials, Leicester can only kind of draw with you on points, and obviously they've got a kind of tough game away in South Africa this weekend coming up against the Stormers, with the Stormers needing to win to stay in as well. So look, I think you've qualified, you've done what you need to do. It's been good all round for the Quins, as in, look, 2026, it's only up from there. But your opponents this weekend coming up is La Rochelle. La Rochelle have. I've seen a lot of stuff online about the Champions Cup's very much the luck of the draw, and La Rochelle were unlucky with who they drew and where they played them. They had to travel to South Africa to play the Stormers, never an easy task. They had to travel to Dublin to play Leinster, never an easy task. They now sit fourth, but if they were to lose the Harlequins, I do believe they'll beat you at home. Um, so I think they'll stay within the competition, but I don't think it's what they would have wanted. Particularly after the performance and the team that O'Gara named against Leinster. La Rochelle threw that game away. To lose it with a last minute penalty, to have had Leinster down to 14 men twice, to knock on the ball with a minute left, to give a scrum free kick to Leinster, to then have that upgraded to a penalty, which Leinster then work to the opposition 22 to give them a penalty. La Rochelle threw it away. They were there. Leinster were there for the taking. Leinster are missing quite a lot of players through injury. I don't know what you think, but I was really hoping La Rochelle would have upset Leinster to kind of throw a kind of spanner in the works regarding the competition and to kind of give them reward for the performance they give, because look, we need performances like that in the Champions Cup to keep it alive. But now they kind of face the prospect of being eliminated and being a low seed. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like La Rochelle at home, you can't really go into that sort of expecting, you know, yeah, it was a great performance against the Stormers, against the weakened Stormers team, if we're actually being honest. As you said, sort of La Rochelle rotated quite a lot. You know, they're going to put out a full whack side. It's a bit of a cliche French rugby that as long as you win your home games, that's what matters. I think that's going to be, you know, really true this weekend, particularly when you think, you know, La Rochelle's prestige in the Champions Cup over the last few years. they're not going to want to go out there. That's going to be probably their biggest game of the year in some respects, at least so far. So yeah, I can also see now that Quins, and you are right, Quins are guaranteed a last 16 position at the moment, a home position, but not guaranteed just yet. I can see Quins rotating quite a lot as well, because you can only play your players so often. I could see maybe even Marcus Smith. I don't know whether he will get benched or dropped and give Jared Evans a start. But I think someone like the likes of Alex Orman have just come in, so he'll start again. But in your second row, you might not play your Guido Petties, you might not play necessarily your first choice front row, for example. So yeah, I think optimistically, Quinn's going all the way in the Champions Cup. They're going to go undefeated, other than the one game they've lost so far. But yeah, you'd be a fool to bet against La Rochelle.
Yeah, I think La Rochelle, as I say, the performance against Leinster, they were events they should have won. Botia ran back that clock. He looked about 21, and he's 36. Like, he was phenomenal. Nolan Legarec, look, I've spoken to him before in the past, and he's quite a humble kind of figure, but he was immense. You spoke about obviously Harlequins number 9. Look, if Nolan Legarec wasn't French and he was playing for any other of those nations in the Six Nations, I believe he'd be the starting 9. I really do. I think you compare him to Jameson Gibson Park, his kicking's better. The creativity, the pace of him is immense. You might argue that Gibson Park has that as well. I look at England, who's your starting Mitchell. Mitchell's very
Yeah,
good, but I would still give Legarec over him. Ben White, I'd say he's better than Ben White. Thomas Williams, I love Thomas Williams, but again, look, I just think he's phenomenal. I think Harlequins will be lucky the fact that Legarec seemed to pull his hamstring, so he might be out for a while. So you might get that to be a very helpful thing. But look, we'll move on. And we'll talk about another English kind of shock win surprise with Saracens beating Toulouse. Toulouse was everyone's favourite to win this competition. They've lost twice. They've lost to Glasgow. They lost to Saracens. Now, I don't want to say it. They play Sale at home. Sale, who won 2, and like, I feel Sale will do what Harlequins will do, which is send over a weakened side. But Sale arguably have the chance to knock out Toulouse. Like, first we'll talk about Saracens and Toulouse. What were your thoughts of that game and Saracens edging them?
yeah. I mean, sort of, you've seen it all over Twitter, or X as it now is, like the Willis on Willis battle. It kind of shows you what England are/will be missing out on in a lot of ways. Like, even just little bits that were quite funny that we're doing the rounds with Tom Willis going over sorting out Jack Willis, or pulling out a bit of a scuffle. But it's frightening, sort of the players that aren't even available anymore. But yeah, I think that was kind of my big takeaway. Sort of just looking at how phenomenal and how physical those two guys are.
I think you're right. I think Saracens went in and they knew the conditions were windy, rainy, tough for a French side that love to play down on the Mediterranean coast. Um, they just went full tilt with their power game. They had a winger who was able to score tries at will. Um, look, Saracens deserve the win. Toulouse, again on a 4G pitch in wet conditions, couldn't get it done against an opposition. So, like, I look at Toulouse and they're going to go play Sale now. They'll win the game, but they've given themselves a mountain to climb in terms of winning this competition, the same way they did last year. Like, could we see 2 years in a row without Toulouse winning it? Could we see another winner? Because Bordeaux were phenomenal the weekend. What can I say against Northampton? I was going to say, oh, they're looking a bit dodgy. I can't say that. They were something else. Northampton, arguably the best team in the Premiership this year, were torn to bits, and they set a strong team too.
Well, with Northampton, it's not even like they played badly. It's really a scary thing. Like Henry Pollock, obviously, with little footballing skills, getting a little jink over, but like they played well when they weren't getting torn through.
Yeah,
When they had ball in hand, they really showed kind of what they could do. I think just back on the Saracens Toulouse game, I think one little word that's probably worth having on the media side of it was how good were the socials from both teams. particularly Toulouse before the game, sort of putting out all the icons of London, kind of London bus going to the Stonex, and then afterwards, just Saracens going, it's a long way to lose. And just that was something that even as someone that maybe has a bit more of an anti-Saracens bias could really kind of get behind and go, that's a lot of fun. I think Saracens have done, to their credit, a lot of good work on the socials this year.
Hey, look, I think we've spoke about this previously, and I think it's important. You need to try and grow rugby. And if both sides are doing that well and getting it, even Quins fans to be like, oh, good on you, Saracens, then something's going right. Do you know what I mean? But look, I'll move on to kind of next weekend in terms of fixtures that have a huge kind of talent impact on the competition. I spoke to you earlier. Oh, sorry. Before we do, you wanted to mention about Ulster and the look. We got a 28-0 win, so it's all good from us. It continues our fine season, but it was a bit farcical. Can you kind of elaborate a wee bit on the farce that happened in not even a major rugby nation in the kind of fields of Holland? Can you give us a wee bit of an insight what happened?
Yeah, it's a really strange one. It's sort of like the game's been called off on a plastic pitch for unplayable conditions, which seems isn't that the whole point of a plastic pitch?
Yeah.
But yeah, so they've based themselves in the Netherlands, which I think for the Challenge Cup is a good decision. The building the game's grown quite nicely in the Netherlands, playing at the Dutch National Stadium. For some reason, pitches somehow frozen. Didn't know plastic could freeze, but it's called off. It's moved to another ground about an hour away. That's also frozen. As you were saying to me off camera, that there's talks of Ulster fans rather potentially going to go and watch the game behind closed doors and sort of peek over the fence, whether or not that's true. But the decision was made to call it off. 28-0, that could have an impact in the long run, maybe. If it's a walkover, is there an argument that needs to be 50-0? Can make it really... Because realistically, if it's going to be seeded, that points difference could make a big difference.
Personally, I think Ulster won't mind too much. I think because they'll be going back home this weekend, they'll be confident with a strong team. They'll be able to get the points at home. So, look, but thing is with Ulster is they're doing very well in the URC. I think the Challenge Cup's a distraction until they maybe reach the quarterfinal, semi-finals. I don't think look, don't get me wrong, it'd be great for them to get to a final and win. But I don't think that's their main interest. I think they want to get back in the Champions Cup for next season. And to do that by finishing the top 8 and restoring a bit of pride in the jersey in the league is probably their kind of focus. You talk about growing the sport again, and you're talking about in Holland and the Netherlands and all this. So look, it was great to put it there. But I'm kind of thinking, you think about the Cheetahs, obviously in South Africa. Look, they lose their advantage of being at home. But would it not be more sensible maybe to put them in Spain, with Spain being arguably the biggest growing rugby nation in Europe, where it's also maybe arguably closer to South Africa, and have Ulster flying to Madrid instead? Would that not have been maybe a better argument or a better shot?
Yeah, potentially. I think maybe it's just me sort of being a bit silly, but maybe the orange of the Netherlands and sort of the orange of the Cheetahs, maybe that was the reason behind it. But they've been based in the Netherlands for a few years, so I think it's a bit more of a established thing. I think maybe if there's talks that maybe there could be, as we mentioned before, that you could get an Argentine franchise in Spain. Could that be an option, or whether you have it sort of the Cheetahs, sort of this travelling road show that goes around you. But the bit that I can't get my head around is how, again, it's something that we've spoken about, is how that you can have a game called off in the Netherlands for a plastic pitch being frozen. But a few years ago, we were having games in Siberia where players have been huddled together under the snow. There's games in Bucharest in the Netherlands. I remember Quins were playing where they had to shovel the snow off the pitch before the game. I don't understand how one is allowed and the other one isn't.
Easiest answer is it's just getting too soft, lad. It's getting too soft. Do you know what I mean? You saw, I didn't like the coverage of it at the time. In terms of the coverage on, was it Matt Carley?
Oh,
wearing
the gloves.
gloves. You can tell there was nothing to talk about in that game. The fact that they spent about 20 minutes talking about a referee wearing gloves. Like, for me, that's a bit embarrassing in terms of the coverage. I think there's more to maybe delve into, and they're supposed to be experts giving us insight. So why aren't they giving us insight? Instead, they're talking about a referee wearing gloves. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
And I've dropped my AirPods.
Anyway, look, we'll move on to this weekend coming up. As I say, there's some major fixtures regarding it. Now, so fans might not know. Obviously, it only takes 2 seconds to Google in terms of the group. Glasgow are currently top seeds in the competition. If they get a bonus point win this weekend at home against Saracens, they will finish top seeds and have a whole route to the final at home if they so wish. Could we see Glasgow in the final? Could they beat Saracens and get that spot? What do you think?
I mean, they've really relished in this sort of underdog position. They've done it in the URC for the past few years as well, where you kind of go, oh, it's just Glasgow, it's just a Scottish team, like whatever. And then they get to the top and they end up winning the whole thing. So I don't see if it goes their way. They are the sort of team that if things go their way, it can go well. I don't know whether later on in the competition, Bordeaux, Toulouse, they've all turned it on historically, where, maybe they've, as we were saying with Toulouse, sort of being a bit soft in the early rounds, doing just enough to get through and then, just sweeping everything aside to get to where they need to. I think Glasgow, they could do it well. They could just fold under the pressure sort of later on. But I think this is, maybe we've spoken about it before, but we're going into the last week of the Champions Cup pool stage and no one knows what's going on. Not through any necessarily lack of communication, but just because the format's too complicated.
I honestly think they'll get the job done. I think they'll beat Saracens. I think Saracens, their big game was against Toulouse at home. I think away from home they've put in a big performance, but Glasgow will be able to get the job done against them. I kind of want to talk about the other two major seeds, which is Leinster and Bordeaux. Leinster have. Uh, I said this when we talked about the expectations. Like, they're flatter into the sea. They've won every game. Their attack isn't functioning. Their attack functioned for the first 10 minutes against La Rochelle, where they got 2 tries in 5 minutes and they looked good. But then it just didn't work. They won the aerial battle, but whenever they come up against another side who can challenge them in the air, I really think they will struggle. They travel to Bayonne, who look Bayonne have got 0 points. They've not done anything. Leinster are percent the strongest team they have. I think they'll win. But I think unless they rack up a huge score, Bordeaux will be second seeds and they could. Although I say that Bordeaux have to travel to Bristol and they're joint 14 points. Like, Bristol went and shocked everyone by winning in South Africa. Could they do it against Bordeaux? Could they come up? Could they come up and shock them with? Look, it's the two most attacking teams in the competition. Can we see something phenomenal here?
Yeah, I think Leinster will kind of go into the game just sort of saying to the players, don't worry about it, just get the win. Sort of the seeding doesn't matter because ultimately it's who you play on the day. And like if Glasgow get top seed, they'll be confident they could probably beat them when it comes to a Champions Cup fixture. So I think that they'll probably go into it kind of expecting to just get the job done, sort of be very clinical. They've not been the same team they have been historically, but I don't see them having any problems against Bayonne. And then, Bordeaux, I think that's going to be an absolute cracker. I think Bordeaux will come away with the win. I think it's probably wishful thinking to say that Bristol are going to spring a surprise, but they've done it once. Maybe that's their cup final, or maybe that's just the start of something new. So we've only got 8 minutes left.
Cool. Look, personally for me, I think Bordeaux, they've shown they can tear apart a good defence. I can't wait for them to tear through a poor defence. Like, the Bulls walked through them at a canter at times. To be fair, Bristol walked through the Bulls at a canter. Like, neither side knew what the word defence meant in that game. I also look. We've already spoke, but I worry about Munster. So I do. Munster play Cast at home. Cast notoriously not great away from home in the competition. Munster need a 5 point victory. They put up a hell of a fight against Toulon, but they kind of need Toulon to show up in Gloucester to do them a favour. That being said, if Munster were to win and Toulon to lose to Gloucester, Toulon will be eliminated. Where do you see this going, or do you just see the obvious happening, which is Gloucester get eliminated?
Yeah, I mean, it's fifth versus sixth as it stands with Munster versus Cast. And I think, again, Cast have been they've not been at the races this year. I think Munster they'll get a 4 point win at least. I think they probably will have enough to get that fifth, just having sort of that Tom Park sort of crowd behind them. But it's so sort of anything could happen, really. I also don't think sort of some teams would necessarily mind dropping down to the Challenge Cup, sort of in the same way that Bath did it last year. It's a controversial take, but is it better to kind of just go take your losses, go, we're going to really.
Who are you suggesting to drop down? Are you suggesting Munster or Gloucester? Because I know Toulon can't.
I mean, Gloucester, I reckon, would probably be more likely to. It's I think both teams would benefit. I think Gloucester have probably got a bit more heritage in the Challenge Cup, and they sort of view it a bit more as a sort of serious competition because they've got those wins behind them. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for the players to kind of go, okay, let's chase some silverware, because you can't if you come in 15th, 16th seed, realistically you're not going to push for the Champions Cup final.
See, maybe it's the fact I'm an Irishman. Maybe it's the fact I listen to Munster and a lot of their fans talking. But they would fully back themselves if they came a 16th seed to give it a good go.
There's a difference
They
between
beat La
believing
Rochelle
yourself,
last season. They beat La Rochelle last season away from home. They put up
there's
a
a big
fight
difference
against
between believing
Bordeaux.
in yourself.
Pardon?
There's a big difference between believing in yourself and actually being realistic. Because with the way it works, with the way the seeding is, it's just going to be a tough game after a tough game after a tough game.
I fully agree and I fully understand. But try explaining that to a Cork man. Do you know what I mean? Or a Limerick man. Try explaining that. Look, I think Gloucester will drop down. I think Munster will get the job done. If they don't, there'll be some serious questions, particularly before the Six Nations, with in regards to kind of Munster looking to kind of push Leinster, especially if the amount of injuries they have, for being like, we want to raise our hands to be considered for the Ireland squad. Well, if you're dropping down to the Challenge Cup, can you actually turn around to Andy Farrell and go, I should be named in the Ireland squad? I don't think so. Um, but
4 minutes.
yeah, what do you think? Like, look, as I said, Toulouse plays Seal. Can you see anything other than a Seal 5 point victory?
I think it's going to be given what happened last year, with Sale really running Toulouse in Toulouse, when it eventually got started after the parachute man finally got freed. That was a fun one to cover. But yeah, I can see Sale backing themselves. I think Toulouse will probably, after this weekend, kind of go, we really need to flip a switch. And I think they probably will pull it out of the bag. But I'm not going to rule out a Sale win. Toulouse they're demoralised. I can see it. I don't think it will happen, but I can see it happening.
Toulouse demoralised. They've got 4 points taken off them in the top 14. They're still riding high in second. God, that must be a tough life. Look, I think we've covered all the important matches. Look, Challenge Cup, I think when it comes to the knockout stages, we'll maybe cover it more because there's some stories like Connacht beat Montpellier away from home. It's kind of Connacht's only way for silverware. It's Ulster's real way for silverware. But as I say, I think when it comes to the knockouts, it'll be more of a kind of honing in to see what will happen. But look, Henry, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. It's an absolute pleasure talking to everyone that's listening. And we hope they've enjoyed the chat. And look, we always appreciate comments and a little bit of kind of find out what they think and what they want to hear. But look, we'll be back next week. Maybe we'll get to talk a wee bit more about Newcastle, about the revolution that's happened in there with signings and all this. But look, for me, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again.